Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie The Thorn Birds, 1983, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There are stories that span generations, and then there are stories that feel like they are generations, etched into time like roots into soil, slow to bloom, slow to die. The Thorn Birds is one of those stories. It doesn't simply tell of love, it lives in love. Haunted, unresolved, aching love that stretches across years and landscapes like a song no one ever finishes singing. It begins in the red dust of the Australian outback and ends in a silence that echoes louder than any final words. This isn't just a film. It's a saga of longing, betrayal, desire, and faith, twisted together like vines around a cross. Set against the wild, unforgiving beauty of early 20th century Australia, The Thorn Birds unfolds over decades, chronicling the life of one woman, Maggie Cleary, and the soul-deep bond she shares with Father Ralph de Bricassart, a man caught in his own torment between divine duty and human passion. Their connection simmers from the first moment they meet, blooming beneath the unspoken rules of society and religion like something forbidden, something sacred, something destined to hurt. The Cleary family, poor and Irish Catholic, arrives at Drogheda, an expansive, drought-prone sheep station owned by the iron-willed and fabulously wealthy Mary Carson. From the start, everything feels a little too intense under the outback sun. The land breathes like a sleeping beast. The people move with a kind of desperation. And Maggie, the only daughter among many brothers, seems to carry something invisible on her shoulders, something waiting to be awakened. Enter Ralph. Young, ambitious, and breathtakingly charismatic, Father Ralph is the parish priest of the district, and Mary Carson's protégé. He meets Maggie when she is just a child, but something shifts between them almost immediately. Not inappropriately. Not quite. But deeply. She's drawn to him with an instinct she can't name, and he, to her, with a hesitation that grows heavier as the years pass and Maggie becomes a woman. And then, inevitably, everything begins to bend. Ralph is torn. The church is not merely his career, it is his path to greatness, to Rome, to the very heart of ecclesiastical power. But Maggie is the thorn, the question, the ache. He tries to resist. He succeeds. Then he fails. And in that failure, the film finds its center, not in scandal, but in sacrifice. Because The Thorn Birds isn't about forbidden love. It's about impossible love. The kind that lingers even after it's been buried. The kind that never lets go. As Maggie grows into adulthood, her life branches in directions she never expected. She marries a man she does not love. She has a child. She hardens. She survives. And always, Ralph is there. Sometimes in person, more often in memory. Their lives twist around each other, sometimes brushing, sometimes bleeding, never quite touching for long. It's a dance choreographed by fate and shame, longing and faith. And with every passing year, what they don't say becomes louder than anything they do. And then comes the child. The son born of that one, impossible moment. Dane. A boy who becomes the embodiment of everything Maggie and Ralph were never allowed to be. Pure, faithful, golden. A child born of sin, who walks straight into sainthood. And yet, even he is not spared the weight of secrets. His story, when it unfolds, will break the heart all over again. Because in The Thorn Birds, love always comes at a cost. Always. The narrative arc of the film mirrors the thorn bird of legend, a creature that sings its most beautiful song only as it dies, impaling itself on a thorn. It's a metaphor wrapped around every frame, every whispered word between Maggie and Ralph. They are both singing as they bleed, knowing they were never meant to have what they most desired. And the tragedy lies not in their failure to be together, but in how fully they loved in spite of it. The visual language of The Thorn Birds is drenched in mood. Wide, desolate shots of the outback mirror the emotional isolation of its characters. The colors shift with the seasons of their lives, dusty golds and dry reds in youth, pale grays and deep shadows as the years harden. The camera lingers on hands that almost touch, eyes that turn away too late. There is silence in this film that says more than any dialogue ever could. And yet, for all its sweeping romanticism, this isn't just a love story. It's a story about time. About how people change and don't. How wounds become weather. How duty can both elevate and destroy. It explores the terrifying idea that doing the right thing doesn't always lead to happiness. That sometimes the thing we must do is not the thing that makes us whole. The performances are raw and unforgettable. Richard Chamberlain as Father Ralph gives a masterclass in contained agony. His eyes carry oceans. You can see him begging God for clarity even as his hands tremble at Maggie's touch. Rachel Ward, as Maggie, is incandescent. She transforms from fragile girl to hardened woman to grieving mother with such natural grace that you forget she's acting at all. And Barbara Stanwyck, in a chillingly restrained performance as Mary Carson, delivers one of the most devastatingly controlled portraits of jealousy ever put to screen. Mary, too, is a thorn bird. Her love for Ralph curdles into manipulation. Her wealth becomes a weapon. Her final act, a last will and testament that changes everything, is a twist that shakes the entire narrative. It's not just drama. It's revenge written in ink. And yet, even she is not a villain. She's a woman who could never have what she wanted, and decided no one else would, either. Each act of the story builds on what came before, until the final chapters play like a requiem. Dane's fate, Maggie's reckoning, Ralph's final moment at the grave, these scenes do not ask for tears. They demand them. Because by the end, the Thorn Birds isn't asking whether love is enough. And then, inevitably, everything begins to bend. Ralph is torn. The church is not merely his career, it is his path to greatness, to Rome, to the very heart of ecclesiastical power. But Maggie is the thorn, the question, the ache. He tries to resist. He succeeds. Then he fails. And in that failure, the film finds its center, not in scandal, but in sacrifice. Because the Thorn Birds isn't about forbidden love. It's about impossible love. The kind that lingers even after it's been buried. The kind that never lets go. As Maggie grows into adulthood, her life branches in directions she never expected. She marries a man she does not love. She has a child. She hardens. She survives. And always, Ralph is there. Sometimes in person, more often in memory. Their lives twist around each other, sometimes brushing, sometimes bleeding, never quite touching for long. It's a dance choreographed by fate and shame, longing and faith. And with every passing year, what they don't say becomes louder than anything they do. And then comes the child. The son born of that one, impossible moment. Dane. A boy who becomes the embodiment of everything Maggie and Ralph were never allowed to be. Pure, faithful, golden. A child born of sin, who walks straight into sainthood. And yet, even he is not spared the weight of secrets. His story, when it unfolds, will break the heart all over again. Because in the Thorn Birds, love always comes at a cost. Always. The narrative arc of the film mirrors the thorn bird of legend, a creature that sings its most beautiful song only as it dies, impaling itself on a thorn. It's a metaphor wrapped around every frame, every whispered word between Maggie and Ralph. They are both singing as they bleed, knowing they were never meant to have what they most desired. And the tragedy lies not in their failure to be together, but in how fully they loved in spite of it. The visual language of the Thorn Birds is drenched in mood. Wide, desolate shots of the outback mirror the emotional isolation of its characters. The colors shift with the seasons of their lives, dusty golds and dry reds in youth, pale grays and deep shadows as the years harden. The camera lingers on hands that almost touch, eyes that turn away too late. There is silence in this film that says more than any dialogue ever could. And yet, for all its sweeping romanticism, this isn't just a love story. It's a story about time. About how people change and don't. How wounds become weather. How duty can both elevate and destroy. It explores the terrifying idea that doing the right thing doesn't always lead to happiness. That sometimes the thing we must do is not the thing that makes us whole. The performances are raw and unforgettable. Richard Chamberlain as Father Ralph gives a masterclass in contained agony. His eyes carry oceans. You can see him begging God for clarity even as his hands tremble at Maggie's touch. Rachel Ward as Maggie is incandescent. She transforms from fragile girl to hardened woman to grieving mother with such natural grace that you forget she's acting at all. And Barbara Stanwyck, in a chillingly restrained performance as Mary Carson, delivers one of the most devastatingly controlled portraits of jealousy ever put to screen. Mary, too, is a thorn bird. Her love for Ralph curdles into manipulation. Her wealth becomes a weapon. Her final act, a last will and testament that changes everything, is a twist that shakes the entire narrative. It's not just drama. It's revenge written in ink. And yet, even she is not a villain. She's a woman who could never have what she wanted, and decided no one else would, either. Each act of the story builds on what came before, until the final chapters play like a requiem. Dane's fate, Maggie's reckoning, Ralph's final moment at the grave, these scenes do not ask for tears. They demand them. Because by the end, the Thorn Birds isn't asking whether love is enough. It's asking what we do when it isn't. And yet, there is beauty in that heartbreak. Redemption, even. The film never punishes its characters for loving too much. It only reminds us that love, true, unflinching love, is rarely clean. It comes with thorns. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing we'll ever do is bleed for it. This is the magic of the Thorn Birds. It seduces you with romance, then breaks you open with truth. It doesn't flinch from pain. It embraces it. Because within that pain is the song. The one the Thorn Bird sings as it falls. The one we carry long after the credits fade. So if you're ready to watch something that leaves an imprint, something that feels less like entertainment and more like memory, then the Thorn Birds is waiting. Not with answers, but with questions. Not with ease, but with depth. And a song you'll never quite forget. Stay with us, we're just getting started. The story begins with a child and a doll, wrapped in brown paper and quiet expectation. There's something gentle in the way the train whistle breaks across the sun-baked sky, something almost sacred in the moment the Cleary family steps onto the parched red earth of rural Australia. It's 1920s New South Wales, and everything feels a little raw, scrubland stretching out like an untamed prayer, heat clinging to skin like a second coat. This is not a soft place. But it's a beginning. Maggie Cleary is just a girl when we meet her, tucked in the shadows of her many brothers, unnoticed except by the eyes of the audience and the wind. She's quiet, observant, delicate but not fragile. Her family is poor and Irish Catholic, headed by a stoic, hard-working father named Paddy and a tired, embittered mother, Fiona, who carries silence like armor. The Clearys have come to Drogheda, the estate owned by Paddy's older sister, the formidable Mary Carson. She is rich beyond imagining, with a house like a cathedral and a mouth like a blade. Her invitation is not born of generosity. It's a transaction. She needs labor. Paddy needs work. And in between them, a fragile, unspoken hostility simmers under every shared glance. The land itself is relentless. Dry winds sweep across plains that crack under their own sun. The sheep station is massive, overwhelming, almost mythical in scale. And yet, the Clearys adapt. Paddy finds comfort in hard work. Fiona, despite her detachment, begins to move through the rhythms of the estate like a ghost through stone. The boys find their footing quickly. But it's Maggie, always just a beat behind, who quietly begins to shift. She is different from the others. more sensitive, more aware. And it's Father Ralph de Bricassart who notices this first. He enters like a portrait painted in gold leaf, young, striking, impossibly poised in his black cassock. Assigned to the district as punishment for once defying his bishop, Ralph is biding time, waiting for the church to notice his brilliance again. He tends to Mary Carson's spiritual needs, but she sees him more as a possession than a priest. Her interest in him is thinly veiled. She adores him, but in the way of someone who loves what she can't truly touch. And Ralph, shrewd and charming, accepts this with a smile and an eye on the long game. But everything changes the moment he sees Meggie. It's an encounter so simple you could miss it, a child wandering the gardens, clutching her broken doll, tears slipping down sunburnt cheeks. And Ralph, kneeling to her level, offering words she doesn't yet understand but somehow needs to hear. There's no seduction, no tension, just recognition. Something clicks. Something ancient. It's not romantic. Ralph takes an interest in Meggie's education, her well-being. He brings her gifts, talks to her as though she matters in a world that rarely even sees her. And Meggie, starved for tenderness, latches on with the full, aching heart of a girl who's never known that kind of attention. He becomes her son, her comfort, her quiet ache. The relationship walks a razor's edge, delicate, innocent, but humming with something deeper, something neither of them yet dares to name. Time passes, and Meggie grows. She matures into a striking young woman, reserved but radiant. And with every year, Ralph finds himself pulled tighter between his ambitions and his affections. He rises in the church's favor, guided by Mary Carson's influence. Yet Meggie remains the shadow at the edge of every triumph, the memory he cannot pray away. He tells himself he's doing God's work, that she'll be fine, that nothing has truly happened. But his visits to Drogheda become more frequent. His eyes linger longer. The lines he's drawn begin to blur. And Mary sees it. Jealousy curls in her like smoke. Not just over Ralph's affections, but over her own fading power. She is a woman used to control, over men, money, legacies. And Meggie threatens all of it. In one of the film's most quietly devastating turns, Mary begins to orchestrate her revenge, not with fury, but with precision. On her 75th birthday, Mary hosts a lavish party, attended by politicians, clergy, aristocrats. It is her final bow, and everyone senses the performance of it. But behind the scenes, she is signing her will. And in it, she changes everything. She leaves her vast estate not to her brother Paddy, as expected, but to the church. More specifically, to the church through Ralph. It is a poisoned gift, one designed to trap him. By giving him the wealth and power he's dreamed of, Mary ensures he cannot walk away from the church, not without sacrificing everything. And she does it with a smile, a final twist of the knife. She dies shortly after, smug in her victory. The impact is immediate. Ralph is promoted, elevated, celebrated. He steps deeper into the corridors of church power, into Rome, into politics, into dreams gilded with incense and marble. But in doing so, he steps away from Meggie. He tells himself it's the right path, that God comes first, that he will forget. He does not. Meggie, abandoned again, shatters quietly. She is not the kind of woman to rage. She breaks inward, turning her pain into silence, her desire into survival. Her family continues to evolve around her. Paddy, proud and simple, finds a kind of peace in labor. Fiona remains distant, favoring Meggie's younger brother Frank, whose bitterness toward Paddy becomes a time bomb of tension. Frank resents the family, the poverty, the endless sacrifice. He wants more. And in his eyes, Meggie sees what it means to want something so badly it hurts. Then tragedy strikes. Frank, after a violent confrontation, is arrested and imprisoned. Paddy dies in a freak accident, swallowed by the outback that never once pretended to love him. The family is hollowed out. And Meggie, still reeling from Ralph's absence, finds herself carrying burdens no girl should bear. Ralph returns, too late. He arrives after the funeral, after the dust has settled. He stands beside Meggie, says the prayers, offers comfort. But it is not enough. And she tells him so, not with anger, but with the kind of grief that leaves no room for pretense. "You left," she says, "and I needed you." It is the first time she demands something of him. And for a moment, Ralph falters. But he cannot undo what he's done. He cannot give back the church's crown without destroying himself. So he does what he has always done. He blesses her, and leaves again. This is where the story deepens into its full ache, where everything that has been hinted, withheld, suppressed, begins to rise. Meggie, heartbroken, makes a choice. She will no longer wait for a man who cannot choose her. She will not live in Ralph's shadow. And so she accepts another's proposal, not because she loves him, but because she cannot love alone anymore. And somewhere, far from Drogheda, in a city of marble saints and golden chalices, Ralph receives the news, and smiles, and bleeds, and turns again to his altar. But even he knows, the fire is only beginning. There's a kind of love that doesn't die when denied, it only deepens. It sinks beneath the surface, silent but ever-present, shaping every choice, every silence, every scar. And when the Thorn Birds moves into its later chapters, that love no longer hides. It reveals itself not through confession, but through consequence. Through the long echo of what wasn't said, through the aching weight of what was sacrificed. Meggie's marriage to Luke O'Neill begins not with a kiss, but with resignation. Luke is charming, yes, with sun-warmed skin and a laborer's strength. But his charm is slick with pride, and his strength is rooted in something far colder than love. He sees Meggie not as a partner but as a prize, an ornament to reflect his own ambition. And Meggie, worn down by abandonment, by grief, by the quiet devastation of Ralph's absence, convinces herself that stability is enough. That a husband who works and provides is better than a priest who dreams of God but cannot see her standing right in front of him. They marry. They move to Queensland. And almost immediately, the cracks begin to show. Luke takes a job cutting sugarcane, but he refuses to let Meggie live with him. He leaves her in the care of a wealthy family, the Muellers, as a domestic helper under the guise of comfort. In truth, he doesn't want the burden of a wife. He wants freedom, independence, the illusion of control. Meggie, ever the survivor, says nothing. She tends to the Mueller home, forms a gentle friendship with and Mueller, and carries her loneliness like a hidden wound. But then, light in the darkness. Meggie becomes pregnant. And something inside her shifts. For the first time in years, she begins to reclaim herself, not through Ralph, not through Luke, but through the quiet miracle growing inside her. The baby becomes her answer, her choice, her rebellion. She doesn't tell Luke right away. She doesn't need to. The child is hers. Entirely. She names him Dane. Born into a world already marked by absence, Dane becomes Meggie's anchor. He is beautiful, golden-haired, and full of a joy that feels almost otherworldly. Everyone sees it, the way his presence seems to ease pain, the way he brings a kind of peace that Meggie has never known. And she loves him fiercely, protectively, as if by doing so she can rewrite her own story. In Dane, she pours everything that was once meant for Ralph. All the tenderness, all the dreams, all the devotion. He becomes her sanctuary. And for a while, it is enough. Back on Drogheda, time moves like water over stone. Fiona grows older, softer. The boys return to tend the land. Life resumes its rhythm. And Meggie, with Dane in her arms, returns home, leaving Luke behind like a faded chapter she no longer needs to reread. But even in the safety of family, the shadow of Ralph remains. He is no longer the young priest in black. He is a Monsignor now. Elevated. Respected. Deep in the church's golden halls, he has risen higher than most ever dream. And yet the ache remains. He cannot forget Droida. He cannot forget her. Every letter unopened, every homily preached, carries the ghost of what might have been. And when he finally returns, years later, he is older, yes, but still the same man. Still torn. Still burning. When he sees Dane, something trembles in the air. The boy is 8, vibrant, innocent. And Ralph, unaware of the truth, feels an immediate bond. He is drawn to him, not with suspicion, but with love. They talk. They walk. They share stories. It's as if Ralph senses something without understanding it. And Meggie watches from a distance, her eyes full of unspoken truths. She never tells him. Not then. Dane grows into adolescence, and his nature only deepens. He is kind, empathetic, devout. He speaks of God not with rigidity but with awe. And when he announces, with quiet certainty, that he wants to become a priest, Maggie's heart breaks all over again. Not because she disapproves, but because she knows. She knows the path. She knows the hunger. She knows the price. Ralph is elated. He offers to mentor Dane, to guide him through the seminary, to help him ascend as he once did. Still unaware that the boy is his own son, he feels a strange pride that he cannot explain. Maggie says nothing. She lets it unfold, because there is no stopping fate when it comes dressed in robes and faith. Years pass. Dane, now a young man, is ordained. His smile is radiant. Ralph stands beside him, both priest and father, though only one of those truths has been spoken. Maggie watches them together, the weight of love and grief braided into every breath. And still, she says nothing. Until the ocean. It happens suddenly. Dane is vacationing in Greece, taking a rare break from his duties. A group of tourists are swept out by the current. Dane, ever the guardian, dives in to save them. He rescues one. Then another. Then one more. But the sea is relentless. The fourth drags him under. And just like that, he is gone. The news travels like a thunderclap. Maggie collapses when she hears it. Not with sound. With silence. A silence so deep it seems to tear the air around her. Ralph arrives soon after, broken, disbelieving. And it is then, in the stillness of shared grief, that Maggie finally tells him. Dane was yours. The words fall like stone into water. Ralph doesn't speak. He doesn't move. For a moment, he is nothing but breath and loss. The truth shatters him, not because it is scandalous, but because it is true. He sees Dane's face again. The smile. The grace. The faith. And he realizes what he missed. What he denied. What he could have had. And now never will. He falls to his knees. And Maggie, too tired to weep, simply watches. The days that follow are blurred by mourning. Ralph, stripped of all his titles in his own mind, remains on Droida. He walks the land in silence, kneels in the chapel alone. He is no longer a cardinal, no longer a rising star. He is just a man who loved too late, who gave everything to a church that took everything in return. Not out of cruelty, but out of purpose. And yet the cost remains. In the final moments of the story, Ralph visits Dane's grave. Maggie finds him there, exhausted and weathered, bent beneath the weight of too many wrong turns. They talk, not as lovers, not even as friends, but as something older. As kindred. As people bound by a love that outlived them both. And Ralph dies there, at the grave of his son. Quietly. Without drama. His heart, finally still. Maggie finds him, his face turned toward the sky. And she smiles through her tears. Because now he knows. Now he sees. And now, finally, he is at peace. The Thorn Birds ends not with resolution, but with acceptance. The kind that doesn't fix what's broken, but holds it gently. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. Meggie remains on Droida, surrounded by the land that shaped her. She carries the memory of Ralph, of Dane, of everything that could never quite be, and in doing so, she becomes more than a survivor. She becomes the song the Thorn Bird sings. Beautiful, painful, and unforgettable. Meggie Cleary is not just the heart of the Thorn Birds. She is its soil. Everything in the story, love, betrayal, sacrifice, endurance, grows from her. Her journey, which begins in the muted shadow of girlhood, unfolds like something elemental, like rain after drought. She is a character sculpted by silence, her mothers, her priests, the world's, and yet she speaks volumes in the way she watches, waits, and finally, claims her own space in a world not made for women like her. At first, she seems small in the frame. A girl lost among brothers, trailing behind them with a broken doll in her hand and a question in her eyes. But even then, there's a stillness to Meggie that makes you look twice. Not passivity, presence. She sees everything. The harshness of the outback. The bitterness in her mother's voice. The way men move through the world as if it were theirs to take. She sees and absorbs. And slowly, that inner world begins to shape the woman she will become. Meggie is not loud. She does not rage, not in the way one might expect. But her resistance is no less fierce. It's quieter. A slow burning. When Father Ralph enters her life, he does not awaken love in her. He awakens recognition. She loves him not because he saves her, but because he sees her. And in that seeing, she begins to believe that she matters. That she can be chosen. But what makes Meggie more than a tragic heroine is that even when Ralph fails to choose her, she refuses to collapse. Her love for him is profound and long-suffering, but it is never blind. She knows what he is giving up when he walks away, and she knows what he is choosing instead. And in that knowledge, she draws strength. She may never stop loving him, but she learns, painfully, deliberately, to stop needing him. When she marries Luke, it is not out of foolishness. It is a form of rebellion, a reclaiming. A mistake, yes, but one made with eyes wide open. Meggie's evolution is not linear. She bends. She breaks. She becomes a mother, and in that role, she finds a love that finally belongs wholly to her. Dane is not just her son. He is her creation, the child of longing and of momentary fulfillment. Her love for him is uncomplicated, total. But it is also where her greatest fear lives. That he will choose, like his father did, a path that takes him away from her. That she will give and lose again, and still, she does not stop giving. By the end of the story, Meggie is not triumphant in the way films often define triumph. She is not victorious. But she is whole. She walks through fire and loss and comes out not untouched, but intact. Not because she was protected, but because she endured. She is the Thorn Bird, bleeding for her song. And what a song it is! Then there is Father Ralph de Bricassart. If Meggie is the soil, Ralph is the sky, distant, dazzling, unreachable. A man torn in two from the moment we meet him. His charm is undeniable, but beneath it lies a storm of ambition and self-doubt. Ralph wants to serve God. But he also wants greatness, power, legacy. And in Meggie, he finds a challenge to all of it. Not because she asks him to choose her, but because she shows him what he is missing. His love for her is real, achingly so. But it is also selfish. He cannot give up the church, not because he doesn't want to, but because he believes he was born for more. And that belief costs him everything. He rises through the ranks, becomes a bishop, a cardinal, stands beneath vaulted ceilings and speaks to the faithful, but never feels home again. Because home was never Rome. It was never the church. It was Maggie. And he left her. Ralph is a man who spends his life choosing the path he thinks is righteous, only to find himself haunted by the one he left behind. His love for Dane is deeply felt, but tragically blind. He mentors him, lifts him, prepares him for a life he believes will bring meaning, but never realizes the truth until it's too late. Until Dane is gone. Until the bloodline he never claimed vanishes into the sea. And in that moment, Ralph becomes fully human. No longer a priest. No longer a servant of the church. Just a father grieving a son he never knew he had. Just a man mourning a woman he always loved, but never stayed for. He dies not in glory, but in grace. At peace. Because finally, he sees it all. Luke O'Neill, by contrast, is the kind of man who thinks love is ownership. He wants a wife, not for companionship, but for appearance. He's not cruel in the traditional sense. He's worse, indifferent. He marries Maggie because she's beautiful, but leaves her behind because she's inconvenient. He doesn't abuse her, but he erases her. And in doing so, he becomes a symbol, not of villainy, but of the way the world so often treats women like Maggie. As possessions. As things to be managed. And yet, Luke is not a monster. He is what happens when ambition blinds empathy, when pride becomes more important than people. And in that, he plays a crucial role in Maggie's evolution. By surviving him, she finds her voice. By leaving him, she reclaims her life. Fiona Cleary, Maggie's mother, is one of the most enigmatic characters in the story. Cold, distant, often cruel with her silence. She favors Frank, her illegitimate son, and barely hides her disdain for Paddy or her children. But beneath that hardness lies a woman broken by time and disappointment. A woman who once dared to love and paid dearly for it. Fiona's tragedy is that she has buried herself alive, and cannot forgive Maggie for still daring to bloom. But even she softens, in the end. In her final scenes, there is a kind of reckoning. A quiet apology. Not in words, but in gaze. She sees Maggie, not as a reflection of her own failure, but as someone who did what she could not. Someone who chose love, even when it hurt. And then, of course, there is Dane. Dane, the son of silence and passion. The embodiment of purity, not because he is perfect, but because he carries so much love without question. He is gentle where others are sharp. He is open where others hide. He becomes a priest not out of duty, but out of joy. He wants to serve not out of guilt, but out of faith. And in that, he becomes the bridge between Maggie and Ralph, the living symbol of what they shared, even if the world never saw it. His death is the final thorn. The final cost. The universe taking back the one good thing that was never allowed to exist fully in the light. But it is also the moment that brings truth. That ends the lies. That lets love speak, finally, without fear. The Thorn Birds is not a story of heroes and villains. It is a story of people, flawed, faithful, longing, lost. Each character carries their own shadow. Each one bleeds differently. But they all sing. They all seek something holy. And in that seeking, they become unforgettable. There are stories we watch, and then there are stories we step into. As though the screen fades, and suddenly we're walking through the dust with the characters, breathing the same heavy air, feeling the same ache in the bones of the land. The Thorn Birds, 1983, with its sprawling narrative and aching romance, became that kind of story. But behind the sweeping landscapes, forbidden love, and unforgettable performances, the making of this miniseries was a saga of its own, a production stitched together by strange coincidences, impossible casting twists, and more than a few behind-the-scenes moments that feel like they could have been written into the script. First, let's begin with the strangest fact of all. The casting almost went completely differently. Richard Chamberlain, who ultimately delivered a devastatingly nuanced performance as Father Ralph de Bricassart, wasn't the original choice. The producers had been eyeing some of the biggest stars of the time, including Christopher Reeve and even, believe it or not, Sean Connery. The idea of Connery, in full priestly vestments, with his unmistakable Scottish burr trying to play a celibate Catholic in the Australian outback is now a cinematic what-if that borders on parody. In the end, it was Chamberlain's quiet intensity, his ability to portray both restraint and ruin, that won him the role. And it nearly didn't happen. He was hesitant. He feared the role would define him too rigidly. But something in the story spoke to him, and thank God it did. Rachel Ward, cast as the luminous and long-suffering Meggie, was another unexpected choice. She was relatively unknown, British, and considered by some to be too polished for the rawness of the Australian setting. But there was something in her screen test that changed everything. A look, a pause, a way of holding sorrow just beneath the surface. And suddenly, Meggie had a face. What's stranger still is that Ward met Brian Brown, cast as her on-screen husband, Luke, during filming. Their on-screen chemistry was laced with resentment, emotional distance, cold practicality. But off-screen? They fell in love. Truly. Passionately. They married a year later, and to this day, they remain together. A love story blooming behind the scenes of a love story gone to ruin. The production itself was massive, spread across multiple locations in California and Hawaii, which doubled for Australia. But that led to some unintended hilarity. In one scene, a kangaroo can be seen hopping in the background, seemingly perfect for the setting. Except that particular kangaroo was actually rented from a California animal trainer. The crew reportedly had to chase it across the set more than once, as it refused to hit its marks and was prone to sudden, unexpected naps. One day, it wandered into the catering tent and ate half of the dessert table. The trainers shrugged. "That's showbiz," one of them said. Weather, too, played its own strange role in shaping the production. During several key scenes, including the dramatic funerals and horseback sequences, the cast was meant to battle fierce Australian dust storms. The makeup team prepared with layers of grime, the wind machines were set to high, and the actors braced themselves, only for sudden, freak downpours to ruin everything. The rain would begin, then stop. Begin again, then vanish. Continuity became a nightmare. In the end, several of the most iconic dusty scenes were created with bags of hand-shoveled desert sand being flung just out of frame. A small army of production assistants stood in trenches, tossing dirt like they were watering crops. And then there was the music. The haunting score of the Thorn Birds, composed by Henry Mancini, became one of the most beloved television themes of the 1980s. But what most don't know is that the iconic main theme, the one that swells in every montage of heartbreak and memory, was originally written for another project entirely. Mancini had composed a variation of the melody for a short-lived romantic drama that never made it past its pilot. When the Thorn Birds came calling, he reworked the piece, slowed its tempo, and layered in strings that wept instead of sang. The result? A theme that seemed to echo the story itself, love that lingered, even when it couldn't last. The production also battled with one of the most sensitive challenges any period drama faces, aging its characters believably over decades. Rather than use prosthetics, which were still rudimentary at the time, the makeup team relied on subtle shading, lighting tricks, and hours of hair design. Rachel Ward, for instance, spent 3 to 4 hours each day in makeup during the later episodes, with entire teams devoted to subtly aging her without distorting her features. Chamberlain, whose father Ralph needed to age gracefully but believably, wore eye bags that were meticulously hand-painted and later retouched with shadows on film. It was a slow art, one the team took seriously. "We didn't want them to look old," one artist said. "We wanted them to look haunted." One of the oddest behind-the-scenes stories comes from the filming of Dane's seaside tragedy. The Greek beach where the scene was shot, actually a cove in Hawaii, had unpredictable tides. On the day of filming, a large jellyfish bloom occurred just offshore, prompting divers to go in first and clear the water. Half a dozen jellyfish were removed, one of which had gotten stuck in a priest's robe. Chamberlain, who was nearby, reportedly said, "Even the sea doesn't want this love story to end." The strangest production note of all? The actual thorn bird, the mythical creature said to impale itself on the sharpest thorn and sing only once, at the moment of death, was almost represented on screen. The writers and producers debated heavily whether to show a symbolic bird throughout the series, a kind of visual metaphor appearing in moments of transition and loss. They even filmed a scene with a sculpted animatronic bird perched in a dying tree. The effect, unfortunately, came off too theatrical, too heavy-handed. It was cut, but its spirit remained. In one final wide shot of Meggie walking alone across the parched land, a bird does fly overhead. No one ever confirmed whether it was planned. Some say it was pure luck. Others say it was the story saying goodbye. And then there's the audience. When the Thorn Birds aired in March 1983 as a 4-night miniseries, it became a cultural event. Viewers tuned in by the millions. It was second only to Roots in miniseries ratings at the time, with over 100 million people watching across all airings. Families gathered around living rooms. Couples whispered during the quietest scenes. People wrote letters, thousands of them, to ABC, to the cast, to Richard Chamberlain himself. Many of them came from women, older and younger, who said the story felt like their own. That they, too, had loved someone they couldn't have. That they, too, knew what it meant to ache without end. One letter read, simply, "I watched, and I remembered a man who was not mine. Thank you for making it beautiful." There's something haunting about the way a story seeps past its lines. The way actors fall in love on set. The way weather refuses to cooperate. The way animals refuse to act. The way music written for failure becomes iconic. The way a single feather, floating across a dusty sky, can feel like a message. The Thorn Birds wasn't just a film made by people. It was a film that made itself, through chance, through tension, through beauty wrapped in sorrow. And for those who stood behind the cameras, who held the boom mics and aged the faces and chased the kangaroo through the props tent, it was unforgettable. Because sometimes the story you're telling isn't the only one being told. Sometimes, the real magic is in the thorns you never planned for. Some stories don't arrive, they unfold. They slip into our lives like a slow rain, at first unnoticed, and then all at once, we're drenched in them, their weight and warmth clinging to us long after they've passed. The Thorn Birds is one such story. When it aired in 1983, it did more than capture attention. It gripped the heart of a generation. But beneath its sweeping drama, beneath the sun-drenched landscapes and stolen glances, lies a current that runs deeper, darker, and more delicate. It is a story woven with paradox, and to examine its key moments through a critical lens is to understand how it continues to resonate, not simply as a romance, but as a meditation on sacrifice, desire, and the unbearable distance between what we love and what we choose. One of the earliest pivotal moments in the Thorn Birds is Mary Carson's birthday and the reading of her will. On its surface, it appears to be a classic narrative twist, an unexpected inheritance, a dramatic reshuffling of power. But its implications stretch far beyond plot mechanics. In leaving her entire estate to the Catholic Church, through Father Ralph, Mary doesn't just cut her family out of a fortune. She weaponizes love. This act is not about legacy. It is about manipulation. It's about what happens when unrequited affection curdles into resentment, and power becomes a substitute for intimacy. Critically, this moment is where the Thorn Birds first reveals its true nature, not as a love story between two people, but a story about the systems that trap them. Mary's bequest to the church forces Ralph to make a decision that appears moral but is, in fact, deeply conflicted. It sets him on a path toward ecclesiastical greatness while simultaneously binding him forever to a woman he does not love and severing him from the one he does. It is, in effect, a crucifixion masked as promotion. And from that point on, every decision Ralph makes is haunted by that original sin, ambition disguised as faith. The audience sees this, even if Ralph cannot. And in doing so, they begin to understand the core tragedy of the narrative, that every act of love is distorted by duty. Ralph's rise in the church is not a triumph. It is a slow unraveling. The further he ascends, the further he falls from the truth of himself. And the irony is devastating. Because the church, meant to represent spiritual liberation, becomes his gilded prison. Another moment of intense critical interest is Maggie's marriage to Luke. On a narrative level, it's an escape, an attempt to sever herself from Ralph's ghost, to assert independence, to claim a life that doesn't orbit someone else's refusal. But viewed more deeply, this union represents the systemic failure of societal roles. Luke doesn't see Maggie. He sees a wife-shaped placeholder. Someone to admire, perhaps, but not to cherish. His neglect is not abusive, it's institutional. He embodies the structure of masculinity that prioritizes control over connection. And in marrying him, Maggie enters a contract that reflects the wider themes of the series. The chasm between desire and reality, between what is wanted and what is given. Critics have often pointed to this chapter in the narrative as one of the most quietly radical. Maggie, in marrying Luke, is not seduced. She is choosing what appears to be the correct path. A man. A child. A semblance of normalcy. But the marriage becomes a mirror, revealing not her weakness, but her strength. She endures it, outlives it, and then discards it, not with fanfare, but with finality. She leaves him, not because she expects something better, but because she refuses to live without self-worth. This is not the act of a romantic heroine. It is the act of a woman reclaiming her narrative. But no event in the Thorn Birds is as emotionally charged or thematically loaded as the birth and eventual death of Dane. Dane is more than a child. He is a symbol. A product of one night of surrendered love, of a moment when two people chose each other over everything else. He is innocence incarnate, and yet his life is wrapped in secrecy. Ralph never knows he is Dane's father. Maggie never tells. This silence, this withholding, is often debated. Should she have told him? Could that knowledge have saved them both? But critics who look deeper see something more nuanced. Maggie's decision to remain silent is not vengeance. It is protection. She knows Ralph cannot be both father and priest. She knows the truth would destroy him, or worse, split him further. In keeping the secret, she gives Dane to the world. To God, to something bigger than her. It is the most selfless, and perhaps the most devastating act of love she performs. And in doing so, the story reaches its thematic pinnacle, love that costs everything and asks for nothing in return. Dane's death is not just a twist. It is a culmination. The sea claims him in a moment of profound heroism, and in doing so, completes the cycle of sacrifice that has haunted the story from the beginning. Dane dies saving others, dying in the act of love, of service, of selflessness. Just like the mythical thorn bird, whose song is sung only as it impales itself. The metaphor is no longer a metaphor. It becomes flesh. It becomes final. For Ralph, the revelation that Dane was his son shatters everything. It is the moment when ambition, faith, and regret collide. He realizes that the church, which gave him status and identity, also took from him the one thing that could have made him whole. In the end, he dies at his son's grave. Not in pain, but in clarity. He dies knowing. And for a man like Ralph, knowing is both a blessing and a burden. Critically, Ralph's arc is one of the most challenging. Some see him as a coward, a man who hides behind robes and titles to avoid the terror of true intimacy. Others see him as a victim of his own idealism, a man who believed too much in duty and not enough in the sacredness of his own heart. But everyone agrees on one thing: his love for Maggie was real. And that reality, however buried, pulses through the entire series like a heartbeat beneath silence. Maggie's final evolution is equally powerful. By the end, she is no longer waiting, no longer hoping. She stands on the land of Droida not as a girl, not even as a mother, but as a woman who has lost everything and still stands. Her survival is not triumphant in the traditional sense. It is quiet, but it is absolute. And in that stillness, she becomes the most radical character of all, not because she loved and lost, but because she loved and endured. The series' critical reception reflects this emotional complexity. When The Thorn Birds aired, critics were divided. Some dismissed it as melodrama, a soap opera stretched across too many nights. But others, many others, recognized its deeper layers. They saw in Maggie's eyes a generation of women who had been taught to want nothing, and in Ralph's robes, the suffocating weight of systems built to make men choose between purpose and passion. Over time, the conversation evolved. Feminist scholars explored Maggie's arc as a subtle act of rebellion. Theologians examined Ralph's crisis of faith as a metaphor for the Church's broader struggles with celibacy, devotion, and humanity. Viewers returned to the story not for the romance, but for the ache, for the questions it asked and never answered, for the truth it whispered, that love, in its purest form, is rarely convenient, often impossible, and always, always worth remembering. The emotional resonance of The Thorn Birds doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from pauses, from what isn't said, from the way a hand hovers in the air and doesn't land, from the silence between two people who have loved each other for decades and know they will never be together, and still they stay in each other's lives. Because love, in this story, is not about possession. It is about presence. And that is what makes The Thorn Birds endure. Not its length, not its scale, but its willingness to say, this is what it means to want and never have. This is what it means to sing as you bleed. And to do it anyway. There's something deeply ironic and oddly poetic about the making of The Thorn Birds. A story built on forbidden love, aching restraint, and emotional wildfire was, behind the camera, crafted in a swirl of heat waves, spontaneous romances, unpredictable weather, and long stretches of cinematic serendipity. The film itself feels slow, deliberate, like time moving through molasses. But behind the scenes, it was anything but slow. It was alive, chaotic, beautiful. A production that, much like the characters it portrayed, carried the burden of impossible expectations, and somehow bloomed anyway. Let's start with the biggest twist of all. The Thorn Birds wasn't filmed in Australia. Despite being a sprawling epic set in the dry, unforgiving outback of New South Wales, the miniseries was largely shot in California and Hawaii. Why? Logistics, cost, time, and the unpredictable beast that is the Australian landscape. Instead of battling kangaroos and actual dust storms, the production team opted for the more controlled, but still challenging, terrain of Southern California's dry farmland and the lush coastal stretches of Hawaii for the beach sequences. Of course, this meant that the crew had to recreate the visual soul of Australia on American soil, a task that required extraordinary attention to detail, not to mention more than a few strategic tricks of the lens. Art directors spent weeks studying Australian flora, importing eucalyptus branches, and hand-painting trees to mimic the sunburnt tones of the outback. They even trucked in bags of red sand to coat the earth and give that distinct sun-scorched look that defines Drogheda. The heat, however, came naturally. Temperatures on set routinely climbed past 100 degrees. Makeup melted. Costumes stuck. And yet, the illusion held. Audiences swore they could smell eucalyptus in the air. That's how good the production team was. They recreated a continent with a few smart choices, and an army of committed artists. Richard Chamberlain, who played Father Ralph, was at the center of it all. Known for his gravitas and quiet intensity, he brought to the role a depth that became the anchor of the entire production. But what many don't know is that Chamberlain was, at times, deeply conflicted about playing the role of a Catholic priest torn between God and a woman. Raised in a religious household himself, he grappled with the ethical and emotional dimensions of portraying a man in spiritual crisis. "I didn't want to judge him," Chamberlain once said. "I wanted to understand him." And understand him he did, so much so that his performance became a cornerstone of his career, forever tying his name to the image of the brooding, tormented priest. Rachel Ward, cast as the luminous Maggie Cleary, was relatively new to acting at the time, and entirely unfamiliar with the scope of what she was walking into. She had initially read for another part, but producers saw in her a softness edged with steel, the exact contradiction that defined Maggie. Her chemistry with Chamberlain was electric, understated yet undeniable, but it was her off-screen chemistry with Brian Brown, who played Luke O'Neill, that sparked the real fire. Ward and Brown's love story blossomed in between takes, amidst camera rigs and sandstorms, as if the story's themes had leapt into reality and rewired their paths. In the series, their characters share a loveless marriage marred by neglect. But off-screen, their connection was instant and intense. They married a year later, and their relationship has endured far longer than many of the love stories they've portrayed. It's one of those rare Hollywood tales where the fiction fades but the emotion remains real. The crew often joked that the production was cursed, not in a sinister way, but in the way that everything that could go wrong did. Animals misbehaved. A supposedly tamed horse threw a prop rider during one of the more dramatic herd scenes, prompting a full shutdown while the rider, unharmed, thankfully, recovered with an ice pack and a beer. A kangaroo, flown in for one crucial scene, refused to cooperate and instead hopped off set into nearby farmland, sparking a 3-hour search party and a now-famous line from the assistant director, "Someone please find the marsupial before Chamberlain sees it and quits." But amidst the chaos, there were moments of unexpected brilliance. One iconic scene, a dusk shot of Maggie walking alone through the fields, the sky turning lavender behind her, wasn't in the script. It was captured during a rehearsal, with the camera rolling quietly, the lighting perfect by pure accident. The cinematographer, stunned by what he saw in the monitor, whispered to the director, "That's the soul of the show. Right there. Don't touch it." And they didn't. That shot made it into the final cut untouched, a perfect image of solitude and strength. Lighting, in fact, became one of the film's unspoken heroes. Because the Thorn Birds spans decades, the lighting team had to subtly reflect the passage of time not only through weather but through the emotional texture of each scene. Early scenes glow with soft warmth, golden and hopeful. As the story darkens, so too does the palette. Shadows stretch longer, interiors dim, eyes glisten with the kind of pain that only carefully positioned light can reveal. And the music, Henry Mancini's haunting score, was stitched into the emotional fabric of the film like a second heartbeat. What many viewers don't realize is that Mancini composed much of the music based on the script alone. He wanted the score to pre-feel the emotion, to arrive in a scene like a premonition. The theme, especially, became so iconic that it charted on Billboard after the series aired, a rare feat for a television score in the 1980s. To this day, a few notes from that melody are enough to summon tears from anyone who lived through those 4 nights in March 1983. The production team also had a rule: never rush the grief. In a world obsessed with pace, the Thorn Birds was built around pauses. Stillness. The weight of breath between dialogue. Directors encouraged actors to sit in silence, to hold looks for just a second too long. "Grief isn't quick," one director said. "Let the audience feel the ache." That rule gave us some of the most unforgettable scenes in television, like Ralph standing in the empty chapel after Dane's ordination, staring at nothing. Or Maggie, silently folding a tiny white suit after Dane's death, her hands trembling but precise. These moments were rehearsed not for perfection, but for truth. There were also more practical challenges. The aging process of the characters was a major concern. There was no CGI, no deepfake aging tools. Everything had to be done with makeup, lighting, posture. Rachel Ward, in particular, worked closely with dialect coaches and movement specialists to age Maggie not just with wrinkles, but with weight. Her voice lowered slightly. Her shoulders curled. Her movements slowed, but never weakened. She didn't grow old. She grew through the pain. And viewers noticed. One of the most whispered stories from set came from the scene of Ralph and Maggie's only night together, a scene so emotionally charged that the set fell completely silent. No jokes, no calls for retakes. Just two actors, fully immersed, telling a love story that was never allowed to flourish. When it ended, the crew reportedly didn't speak for several minutes. Some cried. Chamberlain left the set and didn't return until the next day. It was like something sacred happened, a makeup artist said years later. You don't touch that. And perhaps the greatest fun fact of all, the original runtime of the series was meant to be just 3 hours. Network executives were nervous about extending it further. But once they saw the dailies, footage coming back from the set, they changed course. This isn't just a drama, one exec said. This is a symphony. The runtime was extended. The pacing slowed. And the story breathed. And what a story it became. Audiences didn't just watch the Thorn Birds, they lived in it. For 4 nights, they rearranged dinner plans, canceled trips, ignored phone calls. It was the second most watched miniseries in American history at the time, behind only Roots. Water coolers buzzed with Maggie and Ralph's doomed love. Newspapers ran think pieces about celibacy and spiritual repression. People wrote letters, real letters, asking if Ralph and Maggie had ever existed. That's how real it felt. Looking back now, through the haze of nostalgia and reruns, it's easy to romanticize the production. But the truth is, it was hard. It was messy. It was unpredictable. And maybe that's exactly why it worked. Because the Thorn Birds, at its core, is about love that doesn't fit into tidy boxes. About lives that bleed across boundaries. About beauty born from struggle. The production was no different. And in the end, that chaos birthed something timeless. A story that still sings. A song that still hurts. Even now. Especially now. There are some stories that could only unfold in a certain place, where the land itself becomes a kind of memory, a character, a witness to every unspoken word and buried feeling. In the Thorn Birds, setting is not background. It is soul. The vast, sun-seared landscapes of Australia, whether real or recreated, don't just host the drama. They mirror it. They carry it. They become it. And from the very first frame, we understand that this is not just a love story. It is a story about time. About weathering. About beauty born through struggle. The series begins with a train steaming into the heart of rural Australia, and that opening sequence does more than establish place. It sets the emotional tone. The land is dry, the sky is endless, and the wind moves through the golden grass like a breath held too long. It's not lush or comforting. It's not cozy. This is not a place that embraces easily. This is a place that tests you. And the Cleary family, arriving wide-eyed and hopeful, are immediately dwarfed by it. Drogheda, the massive sheep station where most of the story unfolds, is not simply a homestead, it is an empire carved into earth and silence. Its house looms like a cathedral against the flat horizon, white and remote, isolated even in its beauty. Inside, the rooms are grand but austere. High ceilings, hard floors, light pouring in through windows like judgment. There's something restrained about the interior spaces, a reflection of the emotional repression that defines so many of the characters. Love may blossom here, but it does so under pressure, in corners, in shadows. Much of the Thorn Birds was actually filmed in California and Hawaii, but through a combination of clever cinematography and production design, these locations are transformed into something that feels uniquely Australian. The color palette, sun-baked ochres, deep browns, muted greens, tells its own story. It evokes drought, endurance, and a kind of wild melancholy. The outback is never over-romanticized. It is not the sweeping romantic wilderness of a postcard. It is raw, unforgiving. And in that, it becomes the perfect stage for a love story built on longing and denial. Cinematographer Bill Butler, already known for his intuitive use of light and space, brought a painter's eye to every frame. Daylight was used with discipline. Never too warm, never too sentimental. In early scenes, light is sharp, relentless, casting long shadows that stretch across rooms like unspoken truths. As the story deepens, light softens, especially in scenes between Meggie and Ralph. Candlelight flickers in intimate moments, as if their love only exists in corners too small for the world to see. One of the most visually powerful techniques used throughout the series is the slow pan, a camera move that doesn't hurry but hovers, drifting over landscapes and lingering just long enough to let the weight of a moment settle. These pans often begin in solitude, Meggie standing alone in a field or Ralph walking through a silent chapel. The movement suggests the slow turning of time, the inevitability of change. It lets the audience feel the passing years, the patience of the land, the permanence of loss. Contrast plays a significant role in shaping the emotional tone. Take, for example, the stark difference between the interiors of the church and the openness of the land. The church is filmed with cool, rigid lines, stone, glass, shadow. It feels closed, structured, safe. But outside, in the wilds of Drogheda, everything is vast and exposed. There is no hiding in the landscape. Every emotion, every regret, is visible against the sky. This duality captures the core conflict within Ralph himself, the rigid order of faith versus the wild, aching chaos of love. The setting of Matlock Island, used in later episodes as the retreat where Meggie goes to escape her pain, offers a complete visual and emotional contrast to Drogheda. Here, the world is blue and green. The ocean shimmers. The light dances. But even in this apparent paradise, the camera reminds us that peace is temporary. The cliffs are steep. The waves are strong. And the silence is not absence. It is waiting. It is here that Meggie finally reaches her breaking point. And it is here that she and Ralph share the one night that rewrites their entire history. That scene, so pivotal, so heavy with emotion, is framed with restraint. There are no sweeping camera moves, no swelling music until it's earned. The lighting is soft, golden, almost fragile. And the focus is tight. This isn't a fantasy. It's a reckoning. And the setting, though beautiful, doesn't promise resolution. It only offers a moment. A pause in the storm. Sound design, too, works in harmony with the visuals to build the atmosphere. The wind is a constant presence, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, but always there, like a second voice beneath the dialogue. In scenes of tension, you can hear the creak of floorboards, the distant call of birds, the rustle of dry leaves. Silence is used as punctuation, often holding longer than expected, forcing the viewer to sit with discomfort or anticipation. And when music arrives, Henry Mancini's iconic score, it never intrudes. It swells slowly, like memory, like breath held too long. The natural world is not just observed, it is felt. When characters move through the fields, the grass parts and closes again behind them. When rain falls, it is not gentle, it is release. When the sun sets, it does not dip. It sinks, dragging the day down with it. Every element of the setting is in conversation with the story. And this conversation deepens as the characters age. As Meggie grows from girlhood into womanhood, the land around her seems to shift. In her youth, the fields are vast and golden, filled with possibility. But as life bruises her, as love disappoints her, the landscape becomes less forgiving. The skies darken. The wind picks up. The trees bend but do not break. Just like her. Ralph's world, by contrast, becomes more enclosed. As he rises in the church, the settings around him grow colder, more sterile. Rome is filmed with grandeur, yes, but also distance. Marble corridors, echoing chambers, cold mosaics. Even at the height of his power, Ralph looks small within the architecture. It's a visual metaphor for his spiritual dislocation. He has everything, except the one thing that would have made it all real. And then, in the final chapter, we return to Drogheda. But it's not the same. The house feels older. The land is quieter. The wind is softer, somehow. Time has passed, and you feel it in every frame. The colors have shifted again, now more muted, more faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. When Ralph visits Dane's grave, he walks through this space not as a priest, not as a lover, but as a man. Just a man. And the camera does not look down on him. It meets him where he is. There are no words. Just the wind, and the light, and the sound of leaves moving like breath. When Meggie finds him there, the moment is filmed with aching simplicity. A wide shot. 2 figures, alone in a field. The light low. The horizon wide. And nothing between them now but time. The settings of the Thorn Birds do not just support the story, they shape it. They tell us who these people are. They tell us what they've lost. They tell us what remains. And in the final scene, as Meggie walks alone through the grass, the wind brushing her cheek like a memory, we understand. This land has taken everything from her. And still she stands. Because the land, like the story, endures. Not with ease, but with grace. And always, always, with thorns. Some productions are born from calm and careful planning, everything mapped, scheduled, measured to the second. And then there are productions like the Thorn Birds, films that seem to take on lives of their own, twisting and shifting with every gust of wind, every glance between actors, every unscripted pause. Behind the hauntingly still gazes and aching silences of this sprawling miniseries lies a set that was anything but quiet. A place of laughter and heat, surprise romances and impossible challenges. A world just as tempestuous and unpredictable as the story it was trying to tell. The first thing anyone who worked on the Thorn Birds will tell you is this: it was hot. The kind of dry, relentless heat that makes every breath a little harder and every take a little longer. Though the story was set in the arid outback of New South Wales, Australia, most of the filming actually took place in California. The sun was uncooperative. The dust was real. And the sweat? Not acting. Richard Chamberlain, who played Father Ralph, reportedly went through 5 black cassocks in 1 week of outdoor filming because the salt stains kept showing on camera. But the heat did more than just soak through costumes. It changed the way the crew worked. Makeup artists had to reapply foundation constantly, sometimes between takes, as sweat poured down even the most composed faces. Rachel Ward, whose character Meggie aged over several decades in the story, often had to wear layered aging makeup that melted faster than they could apply it. One assistant joked that every time Ward emerged from her trailer, she looked 10 years older and 10 minutes from boiling. And then there were the animals. There's a strange kind of logic in filming a sweeping romance in the wilderness, until the wilderness starts answering back. The production brought in kangaroos, sheep, horses, and dogs to populate Drogheda and give it that lived-in authenticity. But animals, as the crew quickly learned, do not care about call sheets. The sheep routinely broke through set fencing, trampling over carefully prepared landscapes and leaving behind little gifts that no one wanted to clean up. One horse, startled by a boom mic, took off across the field in the middle of a take, dragging a saddle and an unfortunate prop stand with it. Still, the chaos bred connection. Long days and unpredictable shoots built a sense of camaraderie that translated into deep on-screen chemistry. Rachel Ward and Brian Brown, whose characters shared a bitter and loveless marriage, began developing a real connection between scenes. In fact, the contrast between their characters' dysfunction and their off-camera affection became one of the most charming contradictions of the production. Brown was known for his sharp wit and easy charm, while Ward, at first hesitant and reserved, began to open up as filming progressed. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, the two were inseparable. They married the year after the series aired and remain one of the rare Hollywood couples who have truly endured. Their courtship was not the only romance on set. Crew members often joked that the Thorn Birds was part miniseries, part matchmaking service. One assistant editor began dating a costume designer. A camera operator fell for a script supervisor. In the long golden evenings after filming, the cast and crew would gather for impromptu dinners in the California hills, passing around wine, telling stories, laughing about the endless fight to keep the kangaroos on camera. For a show defined by restraint and repression, the mood behind the scenes was often joyfully unbuttoned. But not everything was romantic. Filming emotional scenes in sequence proved especially difficult. The story spanned decades, and because shooting schedules had to accommodate weather, locations, and actor availability, scenes were often filmed out of chronological order. Rachel Ward might film a scene as young Meggie in the morning, then return from lunch and shoot a moment as an older, weary mother in the afternoon. The emotional whiplash was immense. "I felt like I was aging in real time," Ward later joked in interviews. "One moment I'm brushing my hair like a teenager, the next I'm burying my son." Richard Chamberlain, meanwhile, carried the weight of playing Father Ralph, arguably one of the most emotionally tortured characters in television history. He immersed himself in the role, often retreating between scenes to stay in character. Crew members would sometimes find him alone, staring out at the horizon, rehearsing sermons or whispering lines under his breath. Chamberlain's dedication bordered on spiritual. He didn't just play Ralph. He became Ralph. But even he had his breaking point. During the filming of Dane's funeral, an emotionally devastating sequence near the end of the series, Chamberlain was so affected by the storyline that he asked for a moment alone before shooting. The set cleared. The crew gave him space. When he emerged, eyes glassy, voice quiet, everyone knew the take would be the one. It was. They filmed the entire scene in a single shot. No retakes. The emotional intensity of the show sometimes caught even the crew off guard. Many found themselves weeping behind the camera, especially during scenes between Meggie and Ralph, where the silences held more truth than any dialogue. One camera assistant recalled filming the scene where Meggie finally tells Ralph the truth about Dane. There was a stillness that fell over the set. No one moved. We just listened. We forgot we were working. And then there were the surprises, those unexpected, often humorous moments that make their way into every long shoot. One day, during a particularly solemn scene, a boom mic dipped just a little too low into frame, and into the path of a startled sheep. The animal jumped, knocked over a lighting rig, and ran off with a trailing wire tangled in its wool. The director yelled, someone tripped, and Rachel Ward collapsed into laughter, tears streaming down her face. They had to stop filming for an hour while everyone recovered. In another instance, a prop Bible used in a key church scene mysteriously disappeared. After hours of searching, they found it, tucked under a crew member's chair. He'd been using it as a makeshift coaster for his coffee. Chamberlain was reportedly amused. "Well," he said, "at least the Word of God is getting used." The shoot was also marked by a peculiar kind of superstition. Some crew members believed the story carried a strange energy, that filming a tale about doomed love and spiritual struggle brought with it a certain weight. Several small accidents occurred, nothing serious, but enough to earn whispers. A light exploded during a romantic scene. A priest on set as a consultant tripped and broke his ankle on the church steps. One night, the wind was so strong it tore a camera tent clean off its hinges and sent it sailing across the field like a kite. Afterward, someone taped a sign to the soundstage door, "The Thorn Birds, come for the love. Stay for the curses." But the most enduring behind-the-scenes story is not about accidents or animals or stolen kisses. It's about a letter. During the final week of filming, Rachel Ward received a handwritten note from a viewer who had seen a promotional trailer. It was from an elderly woman in Nebraska who'd read the novel years earlier and wanted to thank whoever was playing Meggie for giving a voice to all the women who loved deeply and lost quietly. The letter was passed around set, read aloud, and taped to the craft services table. It became a reminder, amid the heat and chaos, that what they were making mattered. That they were telling a story that had lived inside people for years. A story that hurt. A story that healed. And maybe that's why, even decades later, people still speak of the Thorn Birds in reverent tones. Not because it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because, behind every frame, there were people who felt it, who lived it, who carried its ache between takes and came back for more. Behind the scenes, the Thorn Birds was messy, loud, laughter-soaked and tear-stained. But above all, it was human. And in that, it was everything the story ever needed to be. Every story that endures does so because it touches something deeper than plot. Beneath its costumes and scripts, its desert settings and long silences, The Thorn Birds is not just a tale of forbidden love. It is a tapestry of themes, interwoven, layered, aching. It speaks not just of what happens, but why it matters. The land, the people, the choices they make, and the pain they endure all echo with meaning that moves beneath the surface like water beneath dry soil. To understand the emotional depth of the Thorn Birds is to look beyond the dialogue and into the shadows between words, where its true essence lives. At the heart of the series lies its central theme, forbidden love. Not the kind painted in easy passion or reckless desire, but the slow, devastating kind, the kind that simmers beneath a lifetime, held back by walls that feel both moral and cruel. The love between Meggie and Father Ralph is not just frowned upon, it's sacrilegious, unthinkable within the structures of faith and power they are caught in. And yet it is never presented as sinful in the narrative. Rather, it is presented as tragic, true, profound, and heartbreaking precisely because it cannot be acted upon without sacrifice. But love in the Thorn Birds is not simply about passion, it is about choice. Every major character, at some point, is forced to choose between what they want and what they believe is right. Ralph chooses the church. Meggie chooses to keep her silence. Dane chooses his vocation. And each of these choices comes with a cost. In this way, the series explores the theme of duty versus desire, a conflict that isn't resolved so much as endured. Ralph's internal struggle is the embodiment of this tension. Torn between his rising ecclesiastical career and his love for Meggie, he rationalizes his choices as sacrifices for God. But beneath this, the series questions, is Ralph really serving God, or is he serving his own ambition? And in doing so, it forces us to ask ourselves what true faith looks like. Is it denial? Is it obedience? Or is it the courage to choose love, even when the world says no? This leads to the most recurring and haunting theme of the entire narrative: sacrifice. Everything in the Thorn Birds is built on giving something up. Meggie sacrifices her youth, her dreams, even her own voice, for the people she loves. Ralph sacrifices his heart, his fatherhood, his chance at a life that might have been more human. Fiona, Meggie's mother, sacrifices emotion itself, locking her love away behind walls of silence. Even Mary Carson, sharp and formidable, sacrifices her own happiness out of spite, giving away her wealth not out of generosity, but to control from beyond the grave. These sacrifices are rarely noble in the traditional sense. They're complex, messy, human. But none is more powerful than Meggie's choice to raise Dane without ever revealing his father. In this choice, the series explores the theme of motherhood as quiet martyrdom. Meggie's love for her son is unshakable, but it is love defined by absence, of truth, of support, of shared burden. Her motherhood is a kind of spiritual cloistering, as much a vocation as Ralph's priesthood. And she bears it with the same mixture of grace and exhaustion. Symbolism, too, runs like a current through the entire story. The most obvious, of course, is the thorn bird itself, the mythical creature said to sing only once in its life, and only when it impales itself on the sharpest thorn. Its song is the most beautiful of all, because it comes at the moment of its greatest pain. The symbolism is not subtle, but it is devastatingly effective. Meggie is the thorn bird. So is Ralph. So is Dane. Each character sings their most truthful, most human song only when they have lost what they love most. This idea, that beauty and truth can only come through suffering, is central to the emotional core of the series. It is not a cynical message. It is, instead, a recognition of the cost of living fully. Love in the Thorn Birds is not free. It demands. It wounds. And yet, it elevates. The thorn bird does not die quietly. It sings. And in that song, it is immortal. Another powerful symbol is the land itself. Drogheda, the vast sheep station, is more than a setting. It is a metaphor for endurance. It is unchanging, harsh, and beautiful. People come and go. Generations pass. But the land remains. It demands respect. It punishes weakness. And yet it offers no comfort. The dust, the drought, the endless horizon, all reflect the emotional terrain of the characters, especially Meggie. Just as she bends to the wind but never breaks, so too does the land absorb everything. Joy, sorrow, blood, and continue. Drogheda becomes the altar where every sacrifice is made. The church, too, is deeply symbolic, not just as a religious institution, but as a force of order, repression, and grandeur. Ralph's ascent through its ranks mirrors a slow drift away from intimacy and truth. The architecture of the church in the series is grand, yes, but also cold. Shadowed. Impersonal. It is beautiful in the way marble is beautiful, distant and unyielding. Ralph's priesthood gives him power, but it costs him connection. And that, perhaps, is the series' most subtle critique, that systems built to elevate the soul can, sometimes, isolate it instead. Light and shadow are used with symbolic precision. When Meggie and Ralph are together, light is often soft, golden, diffused, as though they are glimpsing a world that could be, if only. When they are apart, shadows fall longer. Rooms darken. In one particularly poignant scene, as Ralph chooses to return to Rome, Meggie is framed against a window, light pouring in behind her. She is illuminated, but unreachable. He walks away, into shadow. Even water plays a symbolic role. On Matlock Island, where Meggie flees to reclaim herself, the sea represents both healing and distance. It is the place where she and Ralph come together, and where Dane, years later, will be taken. The ocean, vast and indifferent, becomes a symbol of fate. It gives. It takes. It does not discriminate. One of the more subtle but striking symbols is hair. Meggie's hair, vivid red, untamable, is mentioned often, both in the book and the series. It symbolizes her spirit, her otherness, her refusal to conform. When Ralph first sees her as a child, it is her hair that catches his attention. Later, when she marries Luke and is forced into domestic roles that attempt to flatten her, her hair is tied back, hidden. And when she returns to herself, it is loose again, wild. A small detail, but one loaded with meaning. The series also engages deeply with the theme of silence, especially emotional silence. Fiona, Meggie's mother, is perhaps the most painful example. She loves her daughter. We know this. But she cannot say it. She cannot show it. Her silence is her armor, forged from her own disappointments and losses. This generational silence, of women who endure without complaint, reverberates through Meggie, and Meggie, in turn, must learn when to break it. Her final act of truth, telling Ralph that Dane was his son, is not just a revelation. It is an act of liberation, of breaking the chain. Grief, too, is a central theme. Not just the grief of death, but the quieter grief of unchosen lives, of opportunities missed, of words unsaid. The series understands that grief is not always loud. Sometimes it lives in the way Meggie folds a child's blanket.